In my previous two videos, I went through the basics of Lightroom Classic and also how I edit my own photos. Today I would like to go a bit deeper into the detail panel on Lightroom Classic, which is this particular section right here. And this is, to me, an underrated panel. So this panel can unlock a lot of potential in your image, especially when you have some noise in your image or you want to sharpen certain detail to make your images look better, to make your images look even more crisp. And today that is exactly what I will be doing. I will be showing you exactly what each slider does in order to understand how you can use these particular tools to improve your photos. So we will go through each slider and I will explain briefly and simply as much as possible what each slider does, and then we'll edit the image in a way to show you how everything can merge together to create a very good outcome. So let's get on with it. So the detail panel, as you can see, first you have this particular section right here, this square, which is practically 100% crop of your image. So if you click on a certain part of your image, you can see 100% crop of the image in question. The next slider is the amount slider. The name itself obviously tells us what it does. So it's practically the amount of sharpening that we will be applying to our image. If we zoom in to our image, let's go to 300% crop, you can see that if we increase the amount slider, we are sharpening the image all over. Obviously, the higher the amount, the more sharp the image will be. It doesn't mean that it's better, it just means that we're sharpening more. The radius slider is practically a slider where you can decide what you are sharpening. So if you keep the slider to a low level, you will be sharpening all the fine details. However, if you increase that level, you can see that we've begun to sharpen bigger details, so to speak. So the sharpening is happening across bigger amounts of detail. If we look at, for example, this particular white area, if we reduce the radius, you can see that you end up with a lot of pixels. While if you increase it completely, you have broader and bigger pixels that are overall sharpened. The next slider is the detail slider, and obviously the detail slider, the name implies that it will affect the detail, and that's exactly what it does. It affects the amount of detail that you can see in particular sections. So if we reduce the detail slider, you can see that we've softened out the image. This doesn't mean that the image is not sharpened, because if we reduce the amount slider, you can see that the image becomes even softer. Let's go back to the full amount and go back to the default value of detail. If we increase the detail slider, you can see that the detail becomes intensified. Now, increasing this too high makes the image look quite normal at this particular zoom level, but when you zoom in, you can see that there's too much sharpening going on. Obviously, this is being affected by the fact that we have the amount slider maximized as well. If we reduce this to a normal value, you can see that everything becomes more normal. Going back to the full value of the amount slider, just to show you what the next slider does, and we'll go back to the default value for detail as well, just as we are back to the default value for the radius. Masking is, to me, the most important slider here. Masking practically enables you to decide which parts of the image are actually sharpened. So, for example, if we look at the sky right here, you can see that there's some amount of sharpening going on right here. And this is not something that we like, because obviously the sky should be a very smooth looking part of the image. But with masking, you can mask out larger areas. What this means is that if you keep the value of masking very low, you will be sharpening all of the image. While if you increase the value of masking, you can see that the bigger areas, the more subtle parts of the image, do not get sharpened at all. We can see this in the white and the brown parts of the building right here. If we reduce masking completely, you can see that we have sharpened all the pixels in that particular area, while if we mask out the bigger and more subtle parts of the image, you can see we're only sharpening the edges of the finer detail, so to speak. If we reduce sharpening, right here, you can see which parts are actually getting sharpened. I'm moving the slider across to show you exactly what is being sharpened and what is not. Moving on to noise reduction, we have 6 sliders, but we also have this Denoise button right here. So on the latest versions of Lightroom Classic, we have the Denoise button, which practically uses AI to denoise our image. You still have an amount slider, so to speak, to be able to control how much denoise level you are going to use. I'm not going to go through that, only because we can understand what denoise is doing to our image by going through these sliders. So the Luminance slider is the slider that controls the noise in the brighter pixels, in the brighter parts of the image. So to show you exactly what it does, I'm zoomed in at 400% right here, and if you look at this particular tower right here and we increase the luminance value, you can see that our image has become sort of this very smooth looking image without much texture. But you can still see noise on the edges right here, which is a darker noise, so to speak. So the pixels are actually dark right here, the ones that are actually introducing noise to our image. And this obviously means that we're only affecting the luminance noise right here. The detail slider is practically the same thing as the detail slider in the sharpening tab, but what it does here is decide how much detail you will retain in that luminance area. So you can see that if we reduce the detail slider, for example under this particular window right here, if we reduce the detail slider, you lose all the detail below the windows. Back to the default value. So the contrast slider actually controls how much contrast you are retaining in your image in the luminance areas. So in order to see the effect, you will need to look at the background right here, where there's very minimal detail. So there's sort of a blurred out detail. And if we increase the contrast value, you can see that it becomes a bit more pronounced. It goes hand in hand with the detail value. If we reduce them both together, you can see that we have this very faded, very blurred out detail in the background. And if we increase the contrast and detail slider, we are bringing back some detail in those trees. So the color slider right here is actually the slider that controls whether you're having too much color casts, and it also smooths out any color shifts and color casts in the color areas. So for example, this particular brown part or this green part, if we focus on the roof and we reduce the slider completely, you can see that there are these sort of streaks in a darker brown color. If we increase this value, you can see that we've smoothened out all of that streaky color cast. And the detail slider practically means the same as the other sliders which affect the detail. So if we go to these particular trees right here and we reduce the detail slider, you can see that everything is sort of blurred out, while if we increase that slider, everything becomes a bit more pronounced. Similar to this is the smoothness of color. So if we remove the smoothness of color completely, you can see, for example, just below the roof right here, there's a big separation between the contrast of the whites and the blacks. What the smoothness slider does here is it practically smooths out the colors. And this might be an effect that you want to use, but more often than not, I do not like using this particular slider, because when I increase this slider, you can see that we're introducing browns in the other colors, as you can see. So it sort of smooths out the color that is adjacent to particular areas. So with that said, let me go back to the default values. I'm going back to the default values by double clicking each slider, and it just goes back to the original values that you had when you imported your picture. As I explained before, what I like to do is I like to increase masking quite a bit to mask out the softer parts of the image, the non-detail areas, increase the amount slider quite a bit, reduce the radius, and then play around with the detail to make sure I have the right amount of detail. Keep in mind that I'm on a 400 zoom level, so this amount of crispness and this amount of noise is expected here. I'm going to fix all that noise by using the luminance slider right here. So I've smoothened out everything, increasing the detail just a bit and introducing back some of the contrast here. I'm going to remove color casts, make everything smoother, reduce the smoothness level to remove those color casts, and introduce a bit of detail in the color areas. So at this particular zoom level, the original zoom level, you will not see too much difference. But if we go to 100% value, or maybe at 200% value, which is more realistic, and disable detail panel, you can see how much noise and how much color casts there were in the image. And as soon as we re-enable the detail settings that we created right here, everything becomes a bit smoothed out, everything becomes a bit more normal and eye-pleasing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. You can really bring out a lot of detail in the detail pane, and you can also protect and retain smooth areas by making them even smoother and reducing noise. This particular panel in Lightroom Classic becomes very important when you're dealing with really noisy images. If you want to know more about Lightroom Classic and all the panels within Lightroom Classic that can affect your image so much, please make sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you for watching as always.